It was mid-August. The high sun, though waning in its arc, was still intense and strong. A lazy day amongst lazy summer days, where the heat of the daytime was absorbed by the earth and radiated, baking the inhabitants of the country and prompting sales of ice creams, sunglasses and electric fans. The glorious 12th. Or, mused the wizard, the glorious 12th, or so it was to non-wizard, upper-class toffs with lots of land and money and time on their hands. Not so glorious for the grouse. The wizard crossed to the higher peak of the tor. Around him, below, walkers, or rather, staggerers in the heat, made their way back to their temporary abodes, having done the Yorkshire Dales. Too far away to be noticed. But, just to be sure, the wizard cast a disillusionment charm. He sat down on his haunches. It would be a long wait, he knew. The so-called conjurists would be here, in a few hours. But he had to be sure of what was going on, for the sake of old magic, both the twisted interpretation promoted by the conjurists and the knee-jerk, ignorant reaction to the former by the government. It wasn't going to be so unpleasant, waiting here. At least it wasn't raining. The users of old magic, heathen magic, that of the earth, had been what the Druids had originally practiced, and before, the wise men in the first community in the world, who listened, or had been more attuned to, the nuances and subtleties of nature and the world. The resurgence in recent years, across Europe, and England, especially in the north, was unsurprising. Who didn't want to reconnect with their past and redefine themselves? Especially when a person or community felt that their identity was threatened. The wizard cast his eye down again. From here he could see a couple of hardy coast-to-coasters making their way backwards, towards the Cumbrian coastline, busy in their pursuit and unlikely to make a glance upwards. Not that he would be seen. Should be seen. To make sure, and after a brief scan of the environs, checking for an influx of conjurists, he cast a second disillusionment charm. He inhaled, the air fresher up here than in the valley, where the summer heat cooled discomfortingly. He thought again about the old magic, how it had been twisted and distorted from its true course, of mere interpretation and function. Now it was about ritual and hearsay, about whether you were, not whether you could do. It was about exclusion and hierarchy, about spite and cruelty, about manipulation and mistrust. How much had it infiltrated society? How easily could it be stemmed? If only he had his link, his access, to an clear, objective mind, the only one which made sense to him. But she was missing. And what would happen when it all started? When he started it, that night. It could be argued by some that it had already. Harry had the books. True. He didn't know what to do with them, like someone who cannot read the script in which the winning lottery numbers are written. Who would be leading the coven that night? Below him, in the haze of early evening, wizards, unquestionably wizards, dressed up to the nines in everything wizardly, so they could not possibly be mistaken for anything else, were making their way up to the tor. So he was in the right place. Quickly, wordlessly, the wizard cast a final disillusionment spell, just to be totally sure. And even then there was still a margin for doubt. The growing group, thankfully unaware of an interloper, began to assemble, chatter and wait. It would seem that they knew one another well, clapping one another on the back, bringing superfluous things for one another, like a spare broom, a cloak, or to pore over the latest broomstick catalogue. One conversation centered around the nature of their protests, that it consisted of demanding their rights, in the traditional British manner. Another bare women, talking about inequalities that still existed in public services and education, and that the use of pensives was a great step forward. Pensives? How was this to happen? The wizard wasn't to know, not least through the witch's conversation, because another conversation had caught his ear. He inched towards a third group whose discussions had become more interesting. As he listened, the blood of this usually cold-headed wizard began to warm rapidly. The glorious 12th indeed. He felt the anger surge as he listened to these young men, in their 30s perhaps, talking so casually about what they needed half-breeds for. Disgraceful behavior. Appalling. Grotesque. Grateful that the conjurists around him could not see him clenching one fist inside another, the wizard tried to settle his mind by thinking about Remus Lupin and Sirius Black in hospital. He veered off the thought as it became skewed, and he pictured their faces as both vampire and werewolf respectively, being taken by one of these so-called wizards and set upon, by another half-breed. For their sport. Of course it suited them that the beast's rights were being championed. The influx of people to the tour began to dwindle. Only one or two others joined the 40 or so who were already there. The wizard stepped aside deftly, or the last remaining two would have charged onto him. But there was no focus, no leader. The wizard sat back down again, trying to get all thoughts of the off-handed comments about half-breeds out of his mind. He would wait. And, that such a large group was already assembled, even before sundown, meant that it wouldn't be long, and errors from the ministry, possibly even reciprocators too, wouldn't be far behind. Allowing his mind to uncharacteristically wander, the wizard wondered. Where was Cecilia Lupin? It was anyone's guess. He always knew she was unpredictable, but Cecilia gave a whole new dimension to unpredictability. It was as if that about which can and cannot be speculated are on the same side of the coin. Cecilia's actions were the other. Even the world's most sophisticated computer designed to interpret universal chaos would probably suffer a terminal meltdown when faced with foretelling Cecilia's imminent move. No, she would turn up, sooner or later. He pictured her face briefly, in his mind's eye, indulging himself selfishly, momentarily. A change in the texture of the air brought the wizard back to the ever-present. The wizards had assembled themselves into a sort of circle, ragged around the edges and still with people in bunches from their previous intercourse. As the glow in the center became a human shape, the wizard watched as their leader became clearer and clearer, until its outline bore features. Distinguishable features at that. Damn. The wizard tried not to exclaim aloud. Theo James Potter a galleon. Albus Dumbledore raised his arms as the wizards around him watched him in fascinated awe. The wizard had been wrong earlier. Now it starts. 88,888,888. Unbeknownst to the wizard, and the conjurists, and to Albus Dumbledore too, who may dearly have been interested, Cecilia rested, in lieu of sleep, within 100 yards walking distance from the coven. The good weather had been her friend, and she had gained further ground and was closer than she had anticipated she would be gleaned from glimpses at local signs and maps along the walkways and in the holiday home which had been empty when she had chanced upon it, and in which she had guiltily languished for 3 nights as she recovered from blisters, sunburn and exhaustion. As she watched the sky change from indigo to ink black and the stars prick brighter in the celestial canvas, she reached to her right-hand jacket pocket, which was now on the left and higher up, by her ribs, employed now as a blanket. Her hand closed over advertising leaflet, a handyman that she had picked up in a chip shop in Re-F. The blank side was in fact not empty, for Cecilia had written down the addresses and contact details of everyone and every place she had taken advantage. Clothing, food, accommodation. The most recent of which, for which she might even have been able to add the name of the owner or occupier had she not got out of the shower as quickly as she had done in the wooden lodge at Esqueleth and legged it before they had found her. She had noted duly and solemnly. She would reimburse these people, she had to. It was only right. She focused back on the stars again, so many, so cluttered compared to the urban view she had grown up with in Edgeford and had learned from, that the true constellations seemed alien and indiscernible. But so beautiful. Cecilia waved her hand in the direction of the moving stars around her, like luminescent gnats obeying a kind of Brownian motion. So far she had avoided the attentions of the ministry, by sneaking around as if a criminal, which is what had prevented her hitchhiking or stealing aboard a train or bus to reach the cottage sooner. She suspected these insects, however, if that's what they were, may be something to do with the ministry. A typical strategy of her brother-in-law. But no one had found her yet. And if she could just reach the cottage, and Septimus too, she would be in a position to deflect any attack on her being where, in their opinion, she ought, and Cecilia knew well enough that they would not allow her return to pass unchallenged. Through the waning haze of insects which, in all likelihood, were not magical at all, she stared up towards Polaris, and then to the right. A satellite traveling at quite a rate caught her eye, and she tracked it from right to left. What if she had stayed there, at Durmstrang, as they wanted, and waited there until she was recalled? As far as she knew, Cecilia might have been left there for the rest of her life. How convenient her position was to the ministry, out of the way and a foothold in otherwise closed territory. She thought about the institute and how threatened the ministry was about what actually went on at Durmstrang, their perceived fascination with the dark arts and other controversial topics. As Cecilia got to understand their ways, it began to become clear that the institute, being so isolated, felt itself out of the world and could do what it liked. More, that because its location was so remote, they had the seclusion in order to focus only on pure academia, to test it until it broke, and if it didn't, commit it to being a fundamental magical law or theory. All wizards there, even the students themselves, mostly student wizards with just a handful of witches, were highly focused on their work. The coolness towards one another, though could be perceived as arrogance, was a mere product of dedication to their studies or research. All this Cecilia could understand, if she had been looking for the deepest meaning of life itself, the history of magical language, sounds, vibrations, the development of new spells, and have to search for right words, in right rhythm, tone and intonation to get it to work properly. She would appreciate conditions that were so conducive. It was how she had been in the other world, when she had to untangle the mass of information before her that had led to the universal link. If only more people understood. Despite its secretiveness and exclusivity in admissions, Durmstrang did communicate and collaborate with outside world to deepen their understanding. It was a reason, even if the ministry would be loath to admit it, that other magical institutions around the world had become research-based too, so that magical research was not confined in the four walls of Durmstrang and was actually disseminated rather than being kept hidden on a northern Norwegian island. Examples of research that Cecilia knew the professors at Durmstrang had sought outside information about were magical ability, dark creatures' breeding cycles, magical creatures' parasites, modern curses, and the unique magical qualities of wizards with the red-headed gene. Perhaps, Cecilia mused, as the satellite dipped behind it or and out of sight, it was because she had done the universal link work before, in the old place, that it made sense to her that the professors should collaborate. Even when she had got used to Durmstrang, and she had been there 2 years, it felt like a natural way to do things. There, Cecilia could almost believe she hadn't come from another plane of reality at all. Her active mind, kept from stillness by self-bolstering thoughts, considered her being in this world again. Her old life was easy to recall. Some parts were the same. Some could be tangible, traits of people she had known before, but some completely different, controlled by events in their past, circumstances and the like. Durmstrang was even like how Hedgewoods used to be, Cecilia remembered, but with academic research being carried out. What they didn't seem to understand at Durmstrang was that better exam results on the entrance paper didn't mean the students were cleverer or more able. She thought harder, trying to get past the superficial memories that she remembered in her past. The decor in Grimmauld Place. Her house when it had been ransacked by, as it turned out, Sirius Black. The potions and Mole studies classrooms that she and Snape had worked with. But why had she been there in the first place? Cecilia closed her eye from the stars and lay quietly. A voice, far away, shouted a word to her. Voldemort. Now we're getting somewhere. What was he like? And opened them again. It was hard to remember a lot of details, and speculating on other timeline was a waste of time, Cecilia knew. She did not specialize in metaphysics, though Professor at Durmstrang did, had explained that time operated differently to what humans liked to think. Humans, he had explained, like to think of time as a line, as if drawing a timeline in history lessons, but it's more like a ball of string, with different butts touching at different events. Like when you come back to things, whether accidentally or by on purpose later in life, like a hobby, or remembering an acquaintance. But when time is changed, a little snip in the cord in the ball is made so the ends touch different parts of the ball. Still didn't really understand, and Professor didn't ask her why she wanted to know this. No professor at Durmstrang did. They just did because they were a hotbed of academic minds together, so talking about things was as natural as breathing. Also because it was given that the only reason why other professor would ask would be for their own areas of research. All academia was connected anyway, as far as the Durmstrang professors were concerned. In some respects Cecilia hoped that wasn't true, for she had no true academic discipline. That she had been there, supposedly, to refine the universal link and other themes which fed into other subjects was an ideal cover, but she could tell that the application of a subject was slightly looked down upon as beneath them, and she had attracted the sympathy, though in many respects subtly, subconsciously, by manner or speech, or gait. It was a strange place, but easy to blend in, for no one would want to be the coordinator of an applied subject, as the universal link was perceived to be. Wholly accepted. Able to carry on with her own work into lycanthropy cure, even though it was vanity, accepted by strange, focused wizards who could spend days ambling around their classrooms and offices and having to be revived by house elves because they were forgotten to eat, or sleep, or sometimes go to find the bathroom. And yet she had spied on them for Callias, these people who had, in their way, accepted her. Unlike the reciprocators, she added bitterly. Would she ever be past this? Could she, and just leave it in the past once she got home and back to Septimus, and her Remus too? That what she wanted to do? No more gallivanting, she was older now, they all were. The sea had reflected back an image of this of woman looking back at her. Cecilia remembered leaning over the bowsprit into the crystal clear water over which they had glided. She was past a milestone birthday, of course, and Remus was in his 50s. In the darkness Cecilia turned her head and fixed, in the blackness, towards the west. It would still take her about a week to get there, maybe sooner if this weather held and she wasn't caught up in rain. It would still be August, still before Septimus went to school. In the morning she would wash in still warm spring water. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow, pause, and to the west. 88,888,888. I'm sorry that I left you so long. Callias had surprised Septimus, who had put down a crummy plate on the wooden arm of settee and was waiting for the news to be over so that the second part of Journey into Space could recommence. Brushing the crumbs off his pajamas, Septimus made to tidy up. He knew how much Uncle K hated mess in the cottage. I'll help you with that in a moment, Callias had said, and, much to Septimus's disappointment, turned the knob of the radio to the left until it clicked off on the ancient radio in the polished pine cabinet. I'm glad you're up, lad. I wanted to talk to you. Lad, thought Septimus grimly. When Uncle K called him lad, it usually meant he was about to tell him some bad news. It's about your dad, and Sirius Black, Callias continued, not bothering to sweep the toast crumbs from the sofa cushion next to Septimus. It really must be serious, he thought, if he didn't want to tidy up before he sat down. Callias bent his head in Septimus's direction and rested one arm on his knee. I'm sorry that I've had to leave you so long recently, and I'm glad to see that you've made a friend. James told me that Sam had been to see you, Callias added when Septimus said nothing. Septimus wondered, as he always did, when his uncle filled in the silences, what Callias wanted him to say. He found it better to listen to everything his uncle had to say before asking any questions. It saved time in the long run, especially as Uncle K was prone to being called back to the ministry, or Gimald Place, or somewhere. I was glad to see that James and Lily kept a very good eye on you when you stopped there. Septimus nodded and shuffled on the chair. Come on, he willed, you mentioned Dad. As if hearing him, Callias came straight to the point. Both Sirius and your father are stable. Neither have got worse, and it could be any day now that they come back to us. Sirius is luckier, I have to admit, because once he has woken up, the healers at St. Mungo's can give him wolfsbane straight away. But Professor Snape, you know him? Yes, of course you do, Callias qualified when Septimus nodded, has been working on a potion for your dad's condition. He got to his feet and Septimus sensed that his uncle was becoming agitated. He was attacked by a vampire. At the moment there is nothing that can effectively treat him. Yet. Silence fought for supremacy and won. Septimus, how do you feel about Hedgewoods? Only I wish you to meet with Professor Snape before you make up your mind about which school you want to go to in September. I need to talk to him in any case, and I think you'll find the visit interesting. Septimus nodded. He knew that his uncle would be working on important ministry work. Snape. Septimus ran the imposing wizard's name through his mind. To everyone else, the other reciprocators, Professor Snape was Severus Snape or Severus. It was only his uncle that called him by his surname. That had been the previous evening. A whole day had gone by since then. Callias had explained that he needed Septimus to stop with the Potters again. Septimus looked at the empty bed of Sam's. Even though it was nearly 10:30 and he should be asleep, he knew it would be several hours before his friend came to occupy it. And it had been a fun day too. Sam had come over and gone exploring with Septimus when Julian had called to say Mum was making him go out shopping. Boring shopping, with them instead of grubbing, as they'd planned. He'd explained to Sam what had happened, and he and Septimus had gone to the town at the top of Helvellyn for most of the day and had looked at the abundant entomology that had been, up till that point, hiding in the scrub, around small mammal sprains and decaying bird corpses. A great time, especially when he had opened up to his older friend and told him he was worried about Mum and Dad. Is that strange? Septimus had questioned. No, course not. Sam was older than Septimus by almost 6 years, but far younger in outlook. By contrast, Septimus took things much more seriously with respect to his age. My friends at school are all going to Penrith. Julian too. But Mum wanted me to go to the school she went to in Edgeford. Uncle K wants to take me to see Hedgewoods though. I think he wants me to go there. And what do you want? Sam had asked. Septimus had shrugged his shoulders. Dunno. Mum and Dad always wanted me to go to Hedgewoods when they were together, and so does Uncle K. Well, not Mum actually, I think she just wanted me to choose. And what do you want? Septimus paused and waited for the thoughts to organize themselves in his head. I do have a go at magic. Not much good at it though. I'm at a non-magic school now and there's only me who can do magic. But I could get by, especially if Hedgewoods is taking people with no magic at all. If I can't do much, it wouldn't look so bad. That's a shame. I've seen your charms, your potions, you know. When you were younger. Dad taught me, replied Septimus. A look of sadness had crossed his face. Changing the color of water. Type of metal, and so on. Mum taught me too. She showed me how to do chemistry, how it can be done a different way. I did the metal one by chemistry, not magic. Electrolysis, it's called. Dad had read me Grime Elder, his favorite story. Oh, Sam had replied, surprised. I knew non-wizards could do a lot of things, and with electricity too, of course. Yes, it's in mysterious mythology. Grime Elder is like the non-wizard story called Rapunzel. Mum talked to me about how the stories could be used to tie in scientific discoveries and laws into magic. Fancy being able to doing that. That's just what you'd need to be a reciprocator, you know. Knowledge of both worlds. The wind blew softly around them, relieving them of the intense heat at the top of the mountain. Lots of people do, don't they? Asked Septimus. Sam shook his head. It's one thing or the other. That's why Callias wants a mixture of wizards and mug. Non-wizards there, to try to bridge some gaps. Like you've just said. Then I want to go to Hedgewoods, replied Septimus firmly. How would you feel if it was you? I'd never really given it much thought. Sam wrinkled his brow, momentarily resembling a St. Bernard dog. If I had been used to a non-wizard school. I suppose it'll be weird if students are there who can't do magic. But that's life in the real world, isn't it? Non-wizards working with wizards. And why should they miss out on knowing what we do? They can't do magic, but they can work at the ministry, I suppose. They had walked back to the cottage late that afternoon. There would be no sign of Cleus that night, Septimus knew, and he had been there when his uncle had arranged for him to stay the night at the reciprocator headquarters. Sam was, as usual, starving, and the minute they had gone up the steps and through the side kitchen door, Septimus watched his friend root, fruitlessly, through the near-empty cupboards. "Callias got anything in?" he asked, frowning at the empty spaces where food might have been. Septimus frowned. "Got some bread, some beans. We can do toast." "Doesn't he feed you?" asked Sam, indignantly. "He's busy," protested Septimus. "When he's not at the ministry he's at Grimmauld Place, or out searching for Mum, or at the hospital with Dad and Sirius. I can manage. Come on. Where are we going?" "HQ. Mum's cooking tonight for whoever's around. She's ace. But she's not expecting me till bedtime." But Sam was firm. "Go to the fireplace. Let Cleus know you've gone early." Septimus stared for a moment. "I'll do it," Sam insisted, pointing his wand in the direction of the flu powder. It swirled into a micro-tornado in the center of the grate. Sam put his head directly opposite the whirling mass of tiny solid particles. "Callias Lupin, the Ministry for Magic." Sam spoke the address. "Callias. I'm taking Sam early back to Grimmauld Place for some tea. Just in case you were wondering where he was." Septimus felt himself blush, for he was sure there was a mild hint of sarcasm in his friend's voice. When Sam had finished, the vortex ascended the chimney and would, having passed through the flu network, be waiting for his uncle in his office barely seconds after it had left. Sam then used his wand to summon a second handful of flu powder. "Grimmauld Place," he declared, taking Septimus's hand and pulling him into the hearth. Almost instantly they stood in the hearth of the living room. Lily Potter jerked backwards, clearly she was about to use the hearth at the same time. "Can Septimus stay for tea?" Sam gabbled to his surprised mother. Taking a step backwards she nodded, before regaining the power of speech. "I was just about to flu you, son. All okay, Septimus?" Septimus nodded, glancing past Lily and towards the kitchen where he knew a spread would be on. It was a reciprocator night, after all, and they'd all want feeding. "Of course you can have tea." Lily gestured towards the kitchen as Sam led the charge, followed by a more sedate Septimus. "We've got salad, cold meat, pork pie. We can eat on the balcony." Lily finished gesturing towards the recently installed French doors that led onto a recently renovated balcony. The heat of the Cumbrian countryside was nothing to the focused city heat trapped between buildings in the capital's suburb. "Better than beans on toast, eh?" "Better than beans on toast." Septimus had to admit anything he had ever had at the reciprocator headquarters was better than beans on toast. Staring at his friend's crisply made bed, Septimus recalled what he and Sam had spoken about on the balcony as Mrs. Potter pottered about in the kitchen. Is Hedgewood's fun? He had asked Sam, taking a bite of beef sandwich. Is it ever? Where do I start? Oh, September. You're going to have great fun there. He stood up and leaned over the small plastic outside table and clapped Septimus on the back. You have to try out for Quidditch. And then there's the lessons. They're probably going to be slightly different if non-wizards are going to be there, of course, to when I was a first year. And then there's swimming in the Black Lake. You have to watch out for the dash. Pike? Asked Septimus, confident of swimming in open water, having done it most of his life in the downs and pools around his uncle's cottage for as long as he could remember. And worse, chortled Sam. Oh, Septimus, you won't regret going to Hedgewood's, you really won't. After tea he and Sam went up to his room, their room, that night of course, and he brought down his compendium of board games that he had received the previous Christmas and that was already looking more than a little well used. A few games of Exploding Snap later, as they sat in the living room of Grimmauld Place and halfway through a game of Diopoly before Sam's father arrived, greeting Septimus and reminding his son that the reciprocators would be arriving soon and could they go somewhere else for Septimus to beat him at the property-owning game. Traipsing up to the library and declaring that Septimus wouldn't be the one winning the game. Septimus had changed the subject as the thought of the book he remembered seeing when he had last been there, and surprised by Professor Snape, appeared in his mind. He had wandered over to the shelf where it had been. What are you looking for, September? You're just delaying the inevitable, you know. Do you know of a book, with your brother's name on? Septimus scanned the shelves again. He was sure it had been there, quite thickly, to the left of the window, 3 shelves up and close to the center. The one your mum wrote? Sam crossed to where Septimus was looking, pushing his floppy black hair out of his eyes, and he stooped to where Septimus was looking. Suppose so. Sam mused. I haven't seen a copy for ages. And I don't remember one being here, though. Your mum wrote it before you were born, he added. I suppose I'm old enough to read it now, Septimus added, standing up. It wasn't there. He looked back at Diopoly. Sam was right, he probably would win now. What? Last time I was here, Snape caught me holding the book. He said I would be old enough to read it when I was 11. It was a bit strange, really. I've been able to read since I was 4. Odd. Sam shook his head and headed back towards the board game. That's not like him to be so cryptic. He says what he means, that man. Sam glanced back, wondering why Septimus hadn't sat back down. From the ancient desk Septimus had picked up a wooden framed picture of the reciprocators from a few years before. He smiled as his mother and father waved and smiled. I tried to get in on that picture, said Sam, pointing to the bottom right corner. I'm down there by Mum's leg, she pushed me out. Look, you can just see my hand. Septimus peered, then smiled. A small hand flapped intermittently before jerking out of frame. Arthur and Molly Weasley, you know them, Sam identified as Septimus continued to hold the picture. Mum and Dad, of course, and your mum and dad. And Callias, the Weasley twins, Mad-Eye, Gregor, Severus Snape too. Who's that? Asked Septimus, pointing to a woman he had never seen before. She was thin and plain-looking, but with intense eyes staring out of the image. Tabitha Penwright. Snape's girlfriend. Well, she was, Sam clarified. They're not going out anymore. And she's not been heard of for a while. Septimus frowned, concern filling his mind. Nothing to worry about, she's a Mysteria. They can wander off on their own in their department, the Department of Mysteries. They work on their own. Time is different in different places depending on where they are and what they are involved in. She might be doing something that she thinks hasn't taken more than about 10 minutes, but to us it's a long time. Do you remember her? Asked Septimus, trying not to think about the metaphysical explanation his friend had just presented him with for fear his mind might explode. I remember her necklace. Well, locket. Really? It used to glow. Every so often. I remember when I was little, I used to sit on Mum's lap when the reciprocators came for dinner and just stared at the locket. It was just as if it were warm, like a heart, beating away. Sam had then finished the game, winning as had been predictable, but not by the margin that both he and Septimus had thought before his friend declaring that he was going downstairs to fluke Crystalia, but wouldn't be long. Septimus had put himself to bed, deciding that if he went to sleep before Sam got back, so be it, but hoping that he wouldn't so he could ask him some more about Hedgewards. 88,888,888. Anyone at home? Hi love. James called from the hearth towards the kitchen. When he saw his wife there he kissed Lily on the cheek. I am, said Lily Potter, and enjoying my couple of days off work. Thank you very much, she added, poking Finn at her husband jovially. And Sam. Septimus too. He seemed half-starved, the poor lad. He had 4 whole sandwiches. As well as salad, sausage rolls, cheese. She arched her hand in the direction of the well-laden table and smiled when her husband grinned in approval. Great, I've got to speak to Cleus, in fact No, Sam brought him here. He said there was hardly anything in that Cleus is to eat. Oh James, I do feel so sorry for him. James Potter turned and hugged his wife. It's dreadful. What with both his parents absent, and Cleus so busy, he's latchkey child. Look, I'll tell Cleus he's here, and that he can stop more often with us. Lily nodded, smiling a little and glad of her husband's approval. Hours later, and the reciprocators making to leave, Cleus finally arrived having missed the majority of the meeting. He explained to James that ministry business had kept him from being at what he knew was an important meeting. You called it. James had replied indignantly, but he had some good news for Septimus, for them all in fact. I'll collect him tomorrow, said Cleus, thinking of the long night that lay ahead of him. After breakfast, Lily added. Cleus nodded. It was then that James and Lily both noticed that his appearance was somewhat different to what they were used. Worry and concern had given way to some measure of relief. Although we have no idea where she is, Cleus said, knowing that his colleagues were waiting to hear what he had to tell Septimus, and them all. Cecilia is alive. We don't know where yet, but somewhere in this country.